This is Lost Eidolons. Eidolons? Eidolons? Lost Eidolons. It's a tactics RPG in the vein of things like Fire Emblem that has been released by a surprisingly small indie dev for the actual visual quality and stuff that's going on here, so let's get into this one. In this game, you will play as a charismatic man named Eden, who starts as the sort of captain of a band of mercenaries, a small band of like country bumpkin mercenaries. But there was also an empire, and as we know, in any video game with an empire, that empire shall be evil, and there will be resistance, and that is exactly what happens. There is a growing resistance to this empire, and out of desperation, you are basically forced to join forces with one particular branch of this resistance, and you actually become the vice general of a band of actual soldiers rather than mercenaries under this new resistance. And it tells the story of this man and his friends and other friends that he will make along the way actually growing into this role as sort of resistance leaders and understanding more about the world outside of their small village and actually, getting more involved in this idea of a resistance and things like that. It's actually a pretty good story in my opinion. It does hit a lot of the beats that you'd expect, a lot of the kind of similar stuff that you would get from a video game story about resisting an empire. This is not an uncommon plot thread, but I think that this game actually handles it quite well because of the very character-focused story. It's less about the big picture and more about like the small political struggles of your individual band of mercs becoming soldiers, and that actually makes it a lot more interesting in my opinion. It is, of course, a turn-based tactics RPG, so expect a lot of grid-based maneuvering, where positioning is very important, and you will take turns smacking each other in the head with sticks, and it actually does a really good job in the combat department because the combat is very fun. In my opinion, the tactics are actually quite important because the AI is not bad in this game. It is very good at picking out your weaker characters and rushing them in order to kill them quickly. So if you've got like archers and mages in your army, then you really need to protect them and actually position them in intelligent ways, or else they will get powered down. Also important in combat for a game like this is of course the map design, and the maps are quite fun with lots of buildings, sometimes actual gates that you need to crash down because you're legitimately besieging a city, and there are also monster fights that work a lot differently than the versus human fights, but we'll get into all that in a minute. So first off, all the downtime stuff. You have a camp in between story beats, in between battles, that you'll return to, and the camp is a pretty cool feature because it lets you interact with all of your various soldiers, the various characters in your party, and gain some renown with them. It's called rapport in this game, and as you get rapport, you will unlock special passives for each character, so you are encouraged to develop the storylines and stuff further to make them stronger. And you can even do this with characters that aren't actually battle characters, like for instance the camp cook, who you can build rapport with and is actually a very interesting character in my opinion. She has quite a tragic story, and her sister is actually one of the combat units you can take with you and is a bit of an ice queen at first, but you can open her up a little bit later and help her out to be a little bit more accepting of other people and stuff. So yeah, there's actually quite a lot of character development and things that happen in the camp sections. And the cool thing about the camp is, and this game in general really, is that it gives you a good sense of the scale of the conflict you're in, because it's not just your characters. It doesn't just show the elite units that you're controlling in battle. There's also a bunch of soldiers and guards and scouts and things in the background of all the battles and in the camp as well, and it gives you a sense that you're part of a larger conflict that isn't just between your characters and the enemies you're facing, but it's actually, much larger in scale, and there's a whole bunch of soldiers that are actually fighting alongside you. And in these camp sections, you'll also be able to manage your various characters, like, equipping them, changing their classes, and things like that. You can also find merchants, and different merchants will appear at different times. Sometimes there'll even be a rare goods merchant who sells some really good stuff. You, of course, gain some money from doing side quests, which are normally done in camps, and also some other quests in battle, and of course from completing battles. So you'll be spending this money in between on, new consumables and new gear to help equip all of your characters. You'll also get this sort of stamina-like resource that happens when you're in camp, and you can spend this on interacting with your other various units. And when you do this, it spends some of it depending on how you interact with them, and you never actually have enough to interact with everyone every time. So you have to choose which stories you want to develop and which characters you want to befriend more and stuff like that each time you're in camp. And you can do things like give them gifts, and of course different characters appreciate different kinds of gifts a lot more, and different gifts will raise their rapport more. You can also just choose to have a conversation with them, and this can sometimes unlock other topics that you can chat with them about later, or with other people, or even some side quests and stuff later on. And you can also choose to spend a lot of this resource to have a meal with them, which will allow you to talk about other more specific topics and have a more in-depth kind of character building session, you could say, and it will increase their rapport a lot. But like I said, it does take a lot of this sort of camp resource, and you can only do it a couple of times per camp. And you can also find various books and pages and stuff around camp, which will give you more lore for the game in general, but will also sometimes give you new topics to actually talk to people about, which is a cool feature, and it can help you develop them further that way. As you get farther into the game and your army increases in size, the camp itself will also increase in size, which is really cool, and it'll get various new additions to it, like for instance a training ground that allows you to actually train your character skills outside of combat to make them stronger, which is very useful, by the way. And yeah, it's a cool feature because it shows you that you're growing as an army, and as your camp increases more and more in size and gets more complex stuff in it, like a whole merchant area and a whole blacksmithing area and stuff like that, it makes you feel like you're actually progressing as an army. And there are, of course, some other things that you can do in camp as well, besides like some character quests. There's also this sort of like a bounty board of little side quests you can do that get you this resource that you can talk to a sort of like a quartermaster-like character, a taskmaster, and he will help you expand your camp even further and develop some new stuff there too. So there's a lot to the camping system in this game, actually. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do in between missions. You can easily spend as much time in the actual in-between camp sections as you do in the battles. But, of course, the battles, the combat, this is where the game really shines. So in combat, you will deploy your various units. You'll start out with a specific number of units that the story actually gives you, but as you get farther into the game, other characters can visit your camp for a limited number of days, and if you're able to increase their rapport enough while they're visiting, you can actually recruit them permanently as new units as well. And one area that this game really shines in combat is its character models. The models have really good animations, and the equipment, textures, and models are really cool. So like the weapons and armor, they look really detailed and really awesome, and they're actually easily the best looking part of the game, is all the various armor models and stuff. They do a really good job. It's a low fantasy setting, so you don't have a bunch of like skimpy chainmail bikinis and stuff like that. It's all really grounded, authentic like plate and chain and leather armors that look really cool. In combat, each of your characters has 2 different weapon sets that they can switch between at any time as a free action, by the way. This does not take their turn to do. And they also have a class, which will determine what weapons they're actually good with. Attacking works very much like Fire Emblem. You simply move your character next to an enemy and smack him in the head, and you will see a really nice zoomed in, well-animated combat between the 2 characters, and there are a couple of little details in this combat that I really like. For one, I mentioned the fact that you can actually see a lot of other soldiers fighting in the background when it zooms in like this, which I think is super cool, because again, it gives you a sense that you're part of a larger conflict, which I really like. But also, you'll notice that when the characters trade blows, both of the times, each character actually winds up for an attack, so it doesn't look like they're just standing there and taking the hits to the face for no reason. It looks less like a turn-based smackfest and more like an actual fight, which I really appreciate. It's a small detail, but that little extra bit of animation adds a lot of character to the combat, in my opinion, and makes it feel a little bit more dynamic. It has a sort of rock, paper, scissors-like system going on with the armor types between plate, leather, and cloth armor are strong and weak against certain weapon types like axes, swords, bows, spears, and things like that. And whenever you select a character, if someone has an armor type that you are strong against, it will have a little red frame below their character that'll tell you, hey, you should attack this guy because it will take more damage. And you also, of course, have range units. You do have bow users, and these can, of course, attack units farther away, so they can't retaliate unless they have the range option as well. And bows are quite powerful in this game, but as you would expect, bow users are also relatively fragile, generally using like medium leather armor, so you do have to protect them a little bit because they can get surrounded and killed quite easily, and it's also usually smart to give them like a sword and shield as backup or something, so that if they do get surrounded, they at least have some way to defend themselves, because of course archers cannot attack a unit that is directly adjacent to them in melee range. You also have magic users, and magic users are quite rare in this game. Most of your units are going to be martial units, using swords and axes and things, but you will have a couple of magic users, and there are a couple of different types of magic. There's light magic, which involves some offensive and some curative and defensive. There's also shadow magic, which is pretty much purely offensive and with a lot of debuffs and stuff like immobilization. And then you have elemental magic, which is the 4 main elements that you would expect, and it tends to be quite powerful and versatile. And the way magic works in this game is actually kind of like Dungeons & Dragons magic. It's got the Vancian magic system to it, sort of where you actually prepare a list of spells that you put into each mage's grimoire, and they'll only be able to use those spells. They can know a whole bunch of spells, but you can only prepare a certain number depending on what rank of class they are. So a basic rank 2 mage can only prepare 3 spells, but something like, say, a rank 3 priest can prepare 4 spells, and so on. So it gives them more flexibility to a wider arsenal, and every spell has a certain number of uses in combat. So you have to be careful about how you use your magic users, not only because they're very fragile, they only wear cloth armor so they're easy to kill, but they only have a certain number of uses of each spell, so you've got to position them effectively and use these spells with a pretty good range as efficiently as you can to actually kill the enemies and heal your characters and stuff. So they're really good support units, they're very powerful, but you do have to actually keep some knights around to protect them, or else they will go down in like 1 turn. There is a pretty great class system in this game. Everyone will at first start out as something like a commoner, which is just a dude with like a stick, but as they fight, they will develop their various skills, and skills are determined by everything you have equipped. So if you've got an axe and you attack an enemy with your axe, then you'll get some axe experience as well as character experience. You'll also get experience for the kind of armor you're wearing and the kind of magic you're using. So the different skill levels are all based on the equipment and actions of the characters in battle, as well as having a separate character experience that levels them up as a whole and raises all of their stats, and a class experience bar that actually helps them master their class so that they can be promoted to a new class. And as you gain all these different skill levels, they will unlock different classes that they can spec into, and there are actually quite a few classes in this game, somewhere like around 20-ish or a bit over 20, and everyone can develop into different classes as they raise different kinds of skills and get good at different weapons and different armor types and stuff, and of course have different stats. So whereas everyone will pretty much start off as a commoner without any sort of specialization, as they get better with their various things that they're using, they'll unlock a selection of new classes that they can be promoted to in the camp menus in between battles. Promoting into different classes will give them new weapon proficiencies that give them new passives and new active abilities to use in battle with their chosen weapons, as well as access to new spells if they're a magic user, new armor types with better defenses and things like that. So it's very much worth promoting, and in fact I would argue that promoting is the largest increase in power that you can actually give a unit. Leveling them up helps a lot, but promoting them to a new class helps even more. So you do definitely want to promote your characters down their various class trees and make them stronger and stronger that way. Now the enemies that you'll be facing are mostly humans, and fighting against humans works exactly like you would expect. It's very Fire Emblem-ish. You know, you trade blows, you try and position yourself advantageously, and you take them all out, and they can have all the same classes and equipment that you can have. You can, by the way, find all sorts of pieces of equipment of various rarities, and the equipment tends to have a very significant impact on your stats because the various rare passives and stuff that equipments have can really change how a character performs. So you definitely want like blue rarity and up equipment because it drastically helps by adding all sorts of new passives. But anyway, yeah, when you're fighting humans, it works exactly like you would expect. It's a really solid tactics RPG while fighting humans, and it makes for a very fun combat experience, in my opinion, where your positioning matters a lot, and the enemy AI is good enough to actually position quite well also, and things like terrain effects matter, and various status effects matter. You can set bushes on fire, you can make people wet and shock the crap out of them, you can do all sorts of things, and it's a really solid combat engine. However, you also will sometimes fight monsters. And fighting monsters is very interesting because they've basically made it more of a puzzle combat experience. They've entirely changed how combat works when you fight monsters. Instead of just walking up to an enemy and smacking them in the head, monsters have a specific number of weak points that are on different parts of their bodies, and each weak point is weak to a certain kind of weapon, and the kind of weapon changes every turn. So positioning in one of these fights is all about trying to sort of puzzle all of your people around the monsters in such a way that you can hit these weak points as often as possible, because monsters do a huge amount of damage if they attack you directly, which means if they retaliate, they do huge damage as well. So if you just walk up to them and poke them, they'll poke you back, and you will get hurt way more because just poking them does very little damage. However, hitting one of these weak points does a lot more damage, and it makes it to where they cannot retaliate against you. If you keep hitting weak points, you'll build up a chain which will amplify your damage further and further every time, and if you hit a weak point twice in one turn, it'll shatter it, which means during that turn you can't attack that weak point anymore, but the shattering hit will be a guaranteed crit. So you'll want to do this as often as possible, and in fact this is really the only good way to beat the monsters, because otherwise they'll just do too much damage to you. Now there are some scenarios where you might actually want to attack them directly instead of hitting a weak point, because it changes the direction they face. And sometimes you might have, say, a spear user and a spear weak point, but your spear user can't reach that weak point, so instead you have one of your knight characters with a lot of armor attack the monster from a certain direction, which turns them in that direction, which allows your spear user to hit that weak point that they otherwise couldn't reach. So there are scenarios where you do actually want to just smack them, but you want to do it very carefully with heavily armored units that can take the retaliation of the monster, because certain monsters like manticores, for instance, do tremendous damage, and while you'll only be doing like 5 damage if you hit them directly, you can easily do like 30 plus damage if you hit their weak points. So yeah, it definitely turns the monster combats into more of like a puzzle scenario, and that's really interesting to me because I think it's really neat that they decided to make fighting monsters like a completely different combat experience to fighting humans, because they could have easily just made them take up one square just like humans and you just fight them like normal, but they didn't do that. They made it more of an event with a completely different set of tactics, and I think it's very cool that they decided to go that route. Now, there is a point of contention with this game for some people right now, and that's the turn limit that I mentioned. So when you go into a combat, you have a limit of generally 20 turns to actually get the combat done. It is instant failure if you run up against that 20 turn limit, so you do have to actually do it. It's not just for a bonus or anything. But you do get a bonus depending on how efficiently you completed the mission. You're encouraged to do it as efficiently as possible because the more turns that are left, the bigger the experience bonus you get. And this experience is given towards characters, their skills, and their classes. So it's a really big bonus to get. It definitely incentivizes you to be as efficient as possible. However, I also understand that not everyone is going to like having a turn limit. Personally, I haven't really minded it because I've found the turn limit to be very generous. The highest number of turns I've ever spent in a combat was 15, and that was in a very large map. So I found that the turn limit isn't like a super threat looming over you that makes you have to be extremely efficient or guaranteed lose. Like, it's actually pretty generous in my opinion, but still I also understand that not everybody likes having that turn limit looming over their head. Now, to the devs' credit, at the current time of me recording this, which is Friday, October 14th, they are actually looking into a solution for those people. So they are acquiescing and saying, okay, we can maybe introduce some sort of difficulty selection or some sort of thing that allows you to possibly extend or alter the turn limit. So it's not currently implemented right now. We don't know exactly what form it'll take, but soon they are probably going to be offering a patch that does actually change this aspect of the game for people that want it to be changed. The game already has several different difficulty options, including a difficulty option that allows you to have permadeath for your characters. So if they actually fall in battle, they're gone for good if you want to do that. So I think it actually does make a fair bit of sense for them to also implement something about the turn limit, because the difficulty is otherwise pretty customizable. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. But my current view on Lost Eidolons is that it's really, really fun. It's a genuinely good tactics RPG that is a very nice addition to the genre on PC, where we don't have a huge amount of them still, and is definitely something that you should look into if you're at all a fan of things like Fire Emblem and Advanced Wars and Shining Force and some of the larger like troop combat scale tactics RPGs like this. Also, I should mention that the music is quite nice, and the writing is surprisingly good as well. It's fully voice acted, which is impressive for a small indie team, because I know that sort of thing doesn't come cheap. But the voice actors genuinely do a good job, and the characters are actually pretty well written in my opinion, and the story as a whole, although relatively played out, by which I mean, you know, we're aware of like the Empire and Resistance stories in RPGs, this is not a new concept. It is still well written enough, and with a good focus on like individual character struggles and things, that it's still interesting to go through. So yeah, that's my view on Lost Eidolons. It's a really good time in my opinion, and is definitely something that you should pick up. The price is definitely right. It's actually a little bit low for the amount of content that you're getting here. There's a lot of game for you to go through, and it's quite good. So the link will be in the description below this video so that you can check out the Steam store page for yourself. Thank you guys, as always, very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.